Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 62. And if you watch 61, that was like 16 minutes, boom, pop, done. 62 is going to be a little bit longer. It's going to have maybe a mini-series. We got so much news this week. Oh, and this episode is brought to you by Anglican 1000. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today's January 5th, 2012.
George, we're going to move on quickly here to story number one because we got a lot of stories to get through. First, Gafcon news, or Gafcon 2 news. We announced sometime last fall that Gafcon was going to be in Cyprus. I had talked to an archbishop and got confirmation that Cyprus was the place. And then I talked to the same archbishop and some other people who said, well, we can't get into Cyprus. We're going to go to Athens. And Athens is the place. And, as far as we knew, Athens was going to be the place until we didn't hear any more news. Mm-hmm. This week we've learned through a speech given by Eliu Wabukula, the Archbishop of Kenya, that it's going to be held in Nairobi, which is interesting because we've given some suggestions of where it should be held, and one was China and the other was back in Africa, and it looks, for now at least, that it's going to be in Africa.
Well, that's where it looks like today. We've contacted the Gafcon office in Sydney, Australia, and they're on Christmas vacation, and they have not been back to us yet. But we've also contacted aides to Archbishop Wabukula, and they confirmed that the Archbishop did say that Gafcon will be in October in Nairobi. And they gave some sort of surface reasons for moving it from Athens to Nairobi. One was there was a problem with getting Africans into Europe. There's some visa issues there. Having a plane load of 200 Nigerians and 100 Sudanese show up causes the immigration people a little bit of a heartache. And also there was a sense that, well, we've done the tourism, we've been to Jerusalem, we've been to the mountaintop, we don't want to replicate Gafcon 1, so let's bring it home, bring it to Africa, bring it to the center of the Global South Communion, and go from there.
Well, you said we don't want to replicate Gafcon 1. Gafcon 1 started off with visa problems when they started in Jordan.
Yes, there was a pre-meeting in Jordan, and the Archbishop of Nigeria, Peter Akinola, was refused entry into Jordan, and it just sort of killed the first few days of the conference, of the pre-conference, because the Nigerians had to stay in Israel. They weren't allowed to cross the border.
Now, a lot of people are going, why do we need another Gafcon? And I think George and I will try and visit that without offending anybody, I hope. And you and I were talking in our pre-show. We do a pre-show, in case anybody wants a little behind the scenes. George and I sit and stare at each other on Skype. We drink our Diet Pepsi. We play with the animals, and we talk about what we're going to talk about. And George said, this is kind of like a Vatican II. Maybe they need to sit down and really redefine Anglicanism like Vatican II, help redefine or remind people again of what Rome was about.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask the question, do we need a Gafcon 2, the answer is no, we don't need it. We want it. We want to have a meeting. It's always fun to meet our friends that we communicate with and sort of go to these conferences. It's a lot of fun, but that's something that we would like to do. Is it something we need? Is it something that we need to do, that the Anglican Communion needs to do? The answer is no. The Anglican Communion needs God. It needs the power of the Holy Spirit to animate it. And if Gafcon can somehow fill that need, then absolutely, positively, there's a need for Gafcon. If it's just another meeting, no, we don't need it.
But Gafcon 1, as a one-hit wonder, did a great job. It set forth to establish a new presence here in North America of Anglicanism that happened through what's called the Anglican Church in North America, led by Archbishop Duncan. And it did some principal things with the Jerusalem Declaration that helped re-identify the 39 Articles and other principles of the Church. Now, that's not something we want to see again in Gafcon 2. Gafcon 2, I think the biggest help the Church needs right now is a redefinition of Anglican leadership and really a redefinition of Anglicanism, George.
Absolutely. We've reached the point where anybody can say that they're an Anglican, and it's like saying you're an evangelical. Anybody can say they're an evangelical. Anybody can say that they're an Anglo-Catholic. It's a meaningless term these days. The other day I read this newspaper article about some Anglican bishop in St. Louis being sentenced to 40 years imprisonment for some financial fraud thing. Well, this is a guy who set up his own church, made himself a bishop, bought all the right clothes, and he's an Anglican, as far as the world's concerned. And we just don't have a sense of what is unique about Anglicanism. What is it that people are fighting over? We just don't know that.
Yeah, and so Gafcon 2, and we suggested before, that's your cat, isn't it?
That's the cat playing with the whole batteries I just took out.
We suggested before that Gafcon could be a new Anglican Congress, a place where the leadership gather in the church and really set out a mission of the church. And, we don't have that anymore anywhere at Anglicanism.
Yeah, and there are deep, basic theological questions that move past the Jerusalem Declaration.
Mm-hmm.
What is a bishop? What is his function? What is his purpose? How is the church to be organized? What is the role of the Bible in organizing that church and in our daily living? There are, in the last 150 years since the start of the critical revolution in biblical studies, we have had such a tremendous spread of what the Bible means and says, and so you've got people saying basically flat out contradictory things about the Bible. And we have no sense of what the Bible means on a corporate level. And these are questions: authority, ecclesiology, scripture, basic questions of doctrine that the church needs to get nailed down before it starts going out and selling itself as a solution to the world's problems.
And there's a little bit of irony here because Anglicanism was formed under a prayer book, a true set of theology found in pages of how we show up Sunday and have our daily office and all that. And that really has been lost, and you can tell that by what Anglican looks like today. Maybe this Gafcon can represent the prayer book and represent the 39 articles and represent what it means to be Anglican, because we've lost that identity because, like you said before, anybody can be Anglican.
Over the course of the church's history, we've had people and movements seize the church for its own purposes. We've gone through phases where the Anglican Church, the Anglican way, or the Episcopal way has been identified as the via media. We're not Catholics, we're not Orthodox, but we're certainly not Protestants. There have been other times when we are the Protestant Church, the church that broke away from Rome, and are the Reformed Catholic Church. There are people now saying we are the charismatic church that is being influenced by the power of the Holy Spirit. Well, that's what Gene Robinson tells me. And how do you tell Gene Robinson that, the Holy Spirit is being truthful to him, but not to you? We have no physical base that we all agree upon. And I would hope the Gafcon movement could be that agent that gives us that foundation.
Which, here's the funny thing. We talked about whether or not we need Gafcon, and we said no, we just want it. Well, if Gafcon is going to take on the role of leadership and helping redefine Anglicanism, then we really do need it.
Planting Anglican churches. So what does it mean to plant? What are the strategies for it? What is Anglican? And third, what is the church? So, I went back to the articles of the church. One of the major articles of the 39 articles says that the church is the visible gathering of men, implied women, to where the word of God is purely preached and the sacraments are duly administered. It has nothing about 1,000 people. It has a building. It's self-sustained. It's all that. So I think that we think too low of what God's given us to do instead of thinking big.
Okay, George, Christmas is over. We're into January, and we're starting to hear some pretty terrible stories about what it was like to be a Christian on Christmas. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Iran, Egypt, Libya, Sudan. There was a lot of violence and terrible things. First, let's talk about Pastor Youssef. Pastor Youssef is a Christian pastor in Iran. He was arrested, what was almost 2 years ago, and held in jail for quite a while without trial. He was accused of apostasy, and he was going to be sentenced to death, and it got public, and he was let go, but he was then rearrested, George.
He was arrested on Christmas Day, and basically he's being harassed. He's going to be held in prison for another 60, 90 days for no real reason other than the fact that he's a Christian in a Muslim country. 50 other Christians were arrested on Christmas Day in Iran. The charitable group Christian Solidarity Worldwide reports. Same day, Boko Haram made 2 attacks in Nigeria, killing 24 people. Terrorists in Libya killed a bunch of Egyptian Coptic Christians on Christmas Day. We see the Sudanese government continuing its offensive against the Christians in the Nuba Mountains along the Blue Nile of the Sudan. It's just not a nice time to be a Christian in the Muslim world.
Well, and that's the difficulty Christians face. And here, most of our audience is Western or Westernized, at least, European, American, and parts of Asia. We do have Africans who watch the program. And, for most Americans, they don't realize the persecution that still goes on unless it makes the American press. Unless CNN's covering it or Fox News is covering it, it's not really a story. And Pastor Youssef made the press for a little while because of the threat of death. What's happening here is there's no threat. They're just being arrested, for Sunday services. There's no charges brought against them. They may release them in a month or two. Who knows? What happens with the Boko rain and other parts of Sudan never make the news here in America. And it's kind of this invisible persecution that if you're not signed up for some type of witness magazine, you're not going to hear about, George.
I was listening to Vatican Radio the day after Christmas, and it had an interview with an Italian sociologist, Massimo Introvigna.
Mm-hmm.
And he reported that in 2012, 105,000 Christians were martyred. 105,000 people were killed around the world for their Christian faith.
Huh?
Killed in places like the Sudan, Nigeria, Pakistan. There's that woman in Pakistan who was arrested for blasphemy and sentenced to death, and the Western press was up in arms about it for a few weeks, demanded that she be released, and then they sort of dropped the story. Guess what? She's still in prison.
Mm-hmm.
She's still awaiting the government to decide whether or not she should be executed for insulting the Quran.
Yeah.
That's the reality. I mean, we sometimes go, well, why can't Gafcon, why can't the Global South get more interested in what's going on in the United States? Sometimes when your life is being threatened in Nigeria, the travails of the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church in North America aren't really as immediate.
No, they aren't. I mean, reality, there are no Christian churches in Afghanistan. It's just, they were run out. Before the war, there were quite a few churches. Turkey, not a lot of Christian churches in Turkey. All these places in the Middle East that are under Muslim influence don't allow or don't want Christianity there. And there's a reason. Christianity, when applied, works. And it becomes very difficult to be a Christian or a Christian preacher especially, or a missionary, in those areas. And we need to hold them as an Anglican Unscripted viewer, and that's what you are. We need to hold them up in prayer, especially around the holidays and especially when they're in prison. It's not safe to be a missionary where there's Sharia law and very violent Islamic influence.
We have viewers in the island of Zanzibar,
Mm-hmm.
Christian missionaries, native and overseas, whose lives are in danger simply because that they're Christians in Zanzibar. And it basically gives me pause, when I'm shy about evangelizing, when I really don't feel like telling the good news of Jesus Christ. In good old safe Central Florida, I'm ashamed because here are people in places where by saying the word Jesus, by standing and making a public affirmation, they risk death Why just risk embarrassment?
Okay, on his first appearance in 2013 on Anglican Unscripted, I have Peter Old, all the way from Canterbury, England, across the
Hello,
bar.
Kevin. How are you?
Good. How was your holidays?
It was very good, thank you. My Christmas break,
Yes.
enough of this holiday stuff. My Christmas break was very nice.
Oh,
Went up to my parents.
we have to be PC here.
Yeah. No snow here, though,
No.
unlike you guys.
Oh, we get about a foot and a half on the ground, but
Too bad.
George, who's down in Vero Beach, doesn't know what snow is. So
It's sunny all the time down there,
yes,
isn't it?
the suffrage. So lots been happening in England, but it's kind of artificial news.
Yeah.
The reality is the Church of England has been dealing with what to do with clergy who are of a homosexual persuasion and have same-sex attraction. And there's this thing, well, we can have it where they have a civil partnership, but the person has to be in a different bedroom. No, they can't have sex. They can't take showers together. I mean, it's really convoluted how they do this. Here in America, we have what's called civil partnership. You can have heterosexual civil partnership in every state, and you can have homosexual civil partnerships in half the states. In England, you can only have homosexual civil partnerships. That's correct?
Right.
How is this affecting the decision making about clergy and bishops in the Church of England?
Yeah. So when civil partnerships were introduced in this country 2005, the House of Bishops introduced a pastoral guide which basically said, look, clergy are free to enter civil partnerships, but if they do so, they've got to expect their bishop to ask them questions about what their sexual practice is, right? So the rules haven't changed. Clergy, excuse me,
That's all right.
clergy have to abide by the teaching of the church, either sexual activity within the marriage of a man and a woman, or no sex. Now, in 2010, when they were deciding who the Bishop of Southwark was going to be, Geoffrey John, you remember him from Reading, he was one of the nominees, one of the names put forward. And the House of Bishops got some legal advice put together, which basically said, look, when you're considering who a bishop should be, you can consider if they're in a civil partnership on the basis of, are they in a civil partnership with somebody who they've previously had a sexual relationship with? Are they repentant about that sexual relationship? Things like that. And it was those kind of grounds that were used to basically avoid Geoffrey John being made the Bishop of Southwark. Step forward 2 more years, and the House of Bishops sets up a working group just to look again at how it's going to handle civil partnerships. And quite rightly too, because they've been in place in the country for 5 or 6 years. We now know how they operate, how society is coping with them. It's time just to have a look again. Whilst that review was going on, the House of Bishops basically said, we're going to have a moratorium. Nobody who's in a civil partnership can be nominated to be a bishop. Now, nobody was in a civil partnership was being put forward for being a bishop, but they said, look, let's not prejudge this. Let's just say, let's not do this. What then happened was, just before Christmas, the House of Bishops met, released a statement of all the kind of lovely things that they've been talking about. And one of those things was to saying, well, we're now lifting the moratorium because the working group has reported back to us, and now all they're basically doing is crossing the T's and dotting the I's. So we don't need to have that moratorium. No fuss. The Church Times, here it is.
Well, you're getting
Came out.
form, yes.
There it is. Came out yesterday. Obviously, because it's been Christmas, this is the first post-Christmas issue. They reported on that meeting. That report got into the hands of the mainstream media, and the mainstream media made up this story that basically, suddenly bishops can be gay as long as they don't engage in sexual activity. That's not the story. All that's happened is that we've gone back to where we were 12 or so months ago.
Well,
So
there was a moratorium. Now there's not a moratorium.
That is not a moratorium. Right. So we are back to the position where anybody can be nominated to be a bishop, but they have to show that not only is their lifestyle, particularly their sexual lifestyle, in adherence with the church's teaching, but furthermore, if it wasn't in the past, they would be expected to show that that what they were thinking and teaching now was in line with the church's teaching. Now that's very important, because there are a number of bishops. This is not news, Kevin. There are a number of bishops who are homosexual. Mm-hmm. It's reported that one or two of them may have been sexually active previously, but of the ones that I know that is rumoured of, their teaching now is very, very clearly orthodox. So you might have a case of a bishop who was sexually active previously and now basically says, look, actually, I was wrong. That was sinful. I repent. I want now to teach orthodoxly and to help people live a biblical sexual moral. That's okay. It's not a problem. Well, why should it be a problem?
I read reports from some clergy in the Church of England and some bishops that say they don't need to be repentant. And that there's,
so...
You know, the story really... I mean, the press in England are, wow. They know their job. Keep people interested.
Absolutely.
Keep people interested
Cameras
in anything.
outside Lambeth Palace and everything. There have been two interesting responses to this. Firstly, the liberal response. And the liberal response has basically been, this is a step forward, and but it's still unjust that gay clergy can't be assessed on their own kind of merits. Well, they are being assessed. They're being treated at the same standards that everybody else is. Mm-hmm. Which is basically, if you're married, sex is okay. If you're not, sex is not okay. End of story. What's been very interesting is that some of the conservatives have come out and said, this is an untenable position, right? We can't have bishops in civil partnerships. How would you check that they were? Well, look, how do you check that all clergy are abiding by the rules? Right? When I got engaged, okay, my wife lived about 50 miles away, so she would drive it for the weekend, okay, and she would spend the Saturday with me.
Hold on, what's the name of your bishop? No.
and then Saturday evening, after we spent an evening together watching a movie or something, she would go and stay at some friends in my parish, right? And then so very clear boundaries, and then we would get together again at church and have lunch, and she would go home. Right? We could have been getting up to all kinds of stuff together in my house, but we didn't, right? Let's treat clergy as though they are adults, Ask them, are you breaking the rules? If they say no, that's fine, okay? But so some conservatives, I think their response is a bit extreme. And you know what? The Church of England is trying to balance a very difficult line, yeah? Mm-hmm. It's trying to, at the same time, maintain a traditional sexual moral, and at the other time, try to see how does that work with the way society is structured. Well, we have civil partnerships. In the civil partnership law, there is no expectation for them to be sexual, though most of them are. So it is reasonable that you could enter a civil partnership and it not to be sexual.
Well, here's the hypocrisy that I see. If England allowed for heterosexual civil unions or civil partnerships, mm-hmm. would your candidates for clergy or bishop be allowed to be in a heterosexual civil union?
Well,
I know.
I don't know. I don't know. But if the church's teaching is that sex is for within marriage, mm-hmm. right? When I got ordained, my bishop asked me, right, and at the selection conference, is the manner of your life in accordance with Church of England's teaching, mm-hmm. right? Before they knew whether I was gay or straight or as it happens somewhere in between, right? Mm-hmm. Before they knew that, they just asked me that. It's a standard. It's a standard thing that we should be asking all clergy. Now, where the fuss in England has come is not clergy answering inappropriately; it's bishops who don't ask the question in the first place. That's where the problem comes.
Well, I think the problem comes further down. The line is, what do you believe the biblical response is as a candidate for this? Nobody's asking people their theology. They're just
Yeah.
they're just asking what they're doing in the bedroom. So, there's the standard problem is not just the activity; it's the belief behind the activity.
But what's interesting is I know a number of liberal gay clergy who take their ecclesiology very seriously. And while they would, well, when I say that they're liberal, I mean that they're kind of pro-gay relationships. While they would love to be in a gay relationship, they don't even think about getting into one because the rules say that they can't. And then you have gay liberal clergy who basically try and set up a friendship system, right? So they have someone to be their companion, but they try and put systems in place where that there is no sexual content, right? So you'll have a bedroom at one end of the house here and a second bedroom at one end of the house here and separate bathrooms, right? I know you laugh, but if that gives
laughing.
you what's the difference between that and doing a house share, you know? And,
Well, I
and
think the difference is we've entered into what's called a civil partnership.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and most civil partnerships that are outside the church are engaged in sexual activity. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah. Most of civil partnerships outside the church are engaged in sexual activity, but that doesn't mean that civil partnerships in the church of clergy have to be.
Right.
Now, I understand that's what the concern is of some conservatives, right? And I'm not here basically saying let's undermine biblical teaching. Far from it. What I'm saying is actually let's just stop and say, is the problem clergy not answering the questions truthfully? Or is the problem that bishops don't ask the questions that they should in the first place?
Amen. All right, Peter, let's hope the press can get us a news story for next week and catch you on episode 63 of Anglican Unscripted. Okay, we're going to go on to legal news in episode 62 of Anglican Unscripted, and I have on the other line Alan Haley, who is the canon lawyer of canon lawyers, and he's the guy who's going to help us through this mishmash going on in the Diocese of South Carolina. Now, normally the actions are you get sued first by the Episcopal Church.
Correct.
Or they seize your accounts, or, you're deposed, or you find it, something has happened that has been led by the charge of the legal office at the Episcopal Church. Here with Mark Lawrence and the standing committee and the legal team of the diocese, they've made, they've shot off the first cannon blast after leaving the Episcopal Church and have sued for what?
Okay, they have essentially filed what's a preemptive strike, you could call it, in the civil courts of South Carolina against just the Episcopal Church. That's the only defendant named in the case. And the case seeks just basically two kinds of relief. The first is a declaration or a declaratory judgment, which would declare that the plaintiffs, namely the Diocese of South Carolina, its trustees, and the 16 incorporated parishes who've joined in the lawsuit, own their own property free and clear of any interest by the Episcopal Church. The second item of relief that they seek is an injunction. An injunction is a mandatory command from the court that says, you shall not do this, you shall not do this anymore. And they want the Episcopal Church to stop using the name and the trademarks of the Diocese of South Carolina, namely the seal of the Corporation of the South Carolina. It was incorporated in 1973 as a corporation under South Carolina law. So it's prior to that time, it was just an unincorporated association, the same as the Episcopal Church. But the fact that it's a corporation now means it's a person identified in the eyes of South Carolina and its courts, and that they have an identity, and they're claiming that the Episcopal Church is trying to steal their identity.
In American courts, being on first base first, so to speak, is the best way to do it, because we've always had these arguments about who is the real diocese of South Carolina, San Joaquin, Fort Worth, Quincy, And that's always, it's been an identity crisis. When you're to court first, you assure yourself that you are identified on the docket. Because if you go back to 815, the Episcopal News Service just put out a press release, and basically it says the Rebel Alliance of the diocese, the former Diocese of South Carolina, is trying to sue us.
Yeah.
And they're going for that identity thing where the diocese is no longer the diocese, we are the diocese.
If anything would show how objective ENS is, that fact would show it, Kevin. They are really the Pravda of the Episcopal Church, the state organ, because they're just parroting the official state line that they don't recognize any diocese in South Carolina except the one that they're about to reorganize. Mm-hmm. And yet now they've been sued by a corporation, which is a diocese in South Carolina eyes. So they're going to have a hard time getting that around. That's what's so great about this initial filing by the Diocese of South Carolina. It gets to come into court and say, we are the Diocese of South Carolina, organized originally in 1785 before the upstart Episcopal Church. And we've been around meeting in annual conventions ever since then. And, we helped form the upstart Episcopal Church that's now trying to claim that it's us and take all our property.
Which has been that's been the problem, because so many times the diocese has had to do that on their heels after being sued first, saying, San Joaquin would be a great example,
right?
Where they had to say, no, we are the real diocese,
right?
Yeah.
In fact, in the San Joaquin case, in which I'm assisting, the Anglican Diocese of San Joaquin, the one that Bishop Schofield led out of the church, was never named as a party. That's their technique. That's their strategy. They come in claiming we're the only diocese around. We don't recognize that other diocese. We just want the former bishop, to turn over all the property. And that's the technique they've used in San Joaquin and in Fort Worth. In Fort Worth, they had a challenge there because the attorneys were good enough to question the ability of the attorneys to come in and represent the entity that claimed, they were Jack Eicher's attorneys. And the court said, no, you're not. And forced them to refile under a different name. So, but that's their first chosen strategy, is to come in and try to create a confusion of identities and let the courts think that, oh, yes, it's just the Episcopal Church and there's this upstart group who tried to walk out and take all the property. In this case, they're going to have to deal with a different thing. They've got a corporation unquestionably recognized under South Carolina since 1973, and it's the plaintiff against them. So they have to answer this plaintiff, and they're not going to be able to ignore it.
Okay, let's get some inside information here then. They did not file in Charleston, which is kind of the headquarters for the diocese.
Correct.
They filed in a county north of there. Is there a better legal strategy in putting it in a place where the docket is less populous with court things, or do they know that there's a judge there who would probably be more receptive? What do you think is the behind the scenes?
As I said, they could have filed anywhere in South Carolina as far as the Episcopal Church is concerned, because it's a foreign, unincorporated association. It has no regular place of business in South Carolina, in any city or county of South Carolina. So they could have brought the suit in, I'm pretty sure, in any county they chose of South Carolina. And they chose Dorchester County, which is the one just to the north of Charleston County, northwest. And that St. George is the county seat of that county. And so they're in the circuit court for Court of Common Pleas in St. George, in Dorchester County. And I can only assume that they chose that county, probably, yes, because of a less crowded docket. And maybe there's, that's a good county for other strategic purposes. I'm not into that thinking. I wasn't part of their legal team making that decision. But given that they could have gone anywhere in South Carolina, why it seems obvious that staying away from Charleston, which is where the largest single parish is, that has declared it's going to remain with the Episcopal Church, with over 5,300 members, that probably alone dictated that we want to keep it out of Charleston.
Now, just because you have the perfect legal strategy and some of the court decisions go your way and you get some of the summary judgments on your side, it doesn't make it fast.
No. I always tell my clients litigation is the absolute last resort when you've exhausted all other possible remedies, because litigation is, in contrary to what Thomas Hobbes once said, solitary, nasty, brutish, and short, the life of people before there was an organized society. Well, litigation, it's still solitary, it's still nasty, it's still brutish, but it's not short.
What's that?
It is very, very long. And it takes years and years for things to grind their way through the courts. This is still at the trial level. They will have to answer the complaint. My guess is they might get around to papers and motions in about 6 months or so. The court may take another couple of months to decide it. So maybe a year, by the end of this year, we'll have a trial court ruling. And then that'll just be the first start, because then they'll start the appeals process.
Let's talk about consequences for actions. In the past, we've had some bishops stand up and file friend of the court petitions.
Correct.
These guys have had threats of whatever.
Well, that's another thing that's happening, by the way. We can cover that next week. January 9th and next Wednesday, there's a mediation, quote unquote, taking place in Alexandria.
Right. Do you suspect that those bishops will do a friend of the court now in the diocese, or are they going to be fearful enough not to do anything else? Has what happened previously, because they became a friend of a court, an amicus brief,
right,
stopped them from making any pronouncements with the Diocese of South Carolina?
There's two ways that an amicus brief gets filed. Mm-hmm. One is at the behest of one of the parties in the case. It says, why don't you come in and help us out here, file something along with it. And the other way is you have somebody who's watching the case from the outside who has a vested interest in how it's going and wants to make sure that there's the court hears what its point of view is. So in Texas, for example, the amicus brief that was filed there was filed by the communion partner bishops who had a vested interest in how the Episcopal Church was misrepresenting its polity in the Texas Supreme Court and making representations of according to the communion partners in their studies of the history of the Episcopal Church were just simply not true. So they came in and asked leave of the court and were granted leave of the court. The plaintiffs had nothing to do with the filing of that brief. The defendant, Jack Eicher, and his diocese had nothing to do with it. So in that case, but in Quincy, for example, the other three bishops, they were asked by the plaintiffs in that case, because Quincy, like South Carolina, was the only other diocese to initiate litigation in the court before the Episcopal Church sued it. So Quincy Diocese is the plaintiff there, and they asked the three bishops to provide testimony as to the nature of the polity of the Episcopal Church, that it's not so hierarchical as it claims to be, but the bishops are hierarchical up to the bishop level, but above the bishops, everyone is equal. So they provided that testimony voluntarily because, if necessary, you can be subpoenaed to give testimony by a court. You have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as you see it. And so they told that truth, and now they're being, attacked for it. And so you have both aspects represented in the proceedings against the bishops, the ones who came in on their own motive to protect a point of view that they think is important, and the others who came to give testimony they could have been subpoenaed. They were not. They gave it voluntarily, but there's no point in forcing a subpoena if you know that you're going to get one. So they gave the testimony, and now they're being supposedly sanctioned for it. And we can look at that next week after we know more about what happens. But in any event, it's in South Carolina. I would not expect either of these things to happen right away. South Carolina has its own documented history going back to 1785, has a superb legal team. They have all the evidence and history that they want. Mark Lawrence, when they withdrew from the from the Episcopal Church, Mark Lawrence published a long opinion letter, obviously with the aid of his diocesan council, setting out the whole law and the reason and the history of the joining of the Episcopal Church. I think they've got enough experts, and they've got one canon law expert there on their legal team in South Carolina, who's one of the only canon lawyers I know who has a degree from the University of Cardiff in Wales, where the Anglican dean of all canon law experts is Professor Norman Doe.
Sure.
And so they've got an excellent canon law team, and I don't know that they would reach out in the first place to try to get anyone into more hot water, but we'll see. Not my call.
I'm sure viewers are waiting for next week's show, and we find out more about the mediation or deposition or whatever happens with the bishops who were brought up on charges by 815. Boy, I've heard that before. Okay,
It's January, and we're already off to a running start.
Alan, thank you again so much for your time, and we'll catch you at Anglican Unscripted episode 63 next week.
All right.
George, let's move on to story 3. We're going to talk about Bishop Gene Robinson, the retired Bishop of New Hampshire. He's just stepped down this last week, and he's going about his way. And Gene Robinson is not just a symbol. It was not just an event. It was much more than that. And we're going to talk about this in the two different facets. I want to talk about the timeline of Anglicanism. You and I are 21st century Anglicans, but you know, Anglicanism started out pretty bad. We just started out with that whole divorce thing. Then we had some good things happen where we murdered off a couple Archbishop of Canterbury's and some people in Uganda, and the church started growing and was healthy and strong. And we thought we had everything going well as a colonized church, but we ran into some things that we were not able to overcome. And some of that was holding the province together by holding it to a standard. And let's talk a little bit about Gene Robinson, the symbol. And it would be wrong to talk about just Gene Robinson, the man. Tell me a little bit about the symbol that is Gene Robinson.
Before I do, I just want to reiterate your point about the man. I'm a sinner, I'm a failed, flawed human being, and for me to throw stones at the person of Gene Robinson is wrong. And it's unhelpful. There have been some conservative commentators who've taken great delight in attacking personally Gene Robinson. And that doesn't build a kingdom, that doesn't build up the church. I don't agree with many of the things he said or done, but I don't think we should attack him for that on a personal level. Being said, the symbol of Gene Robinson, of becoming bishop in 2003, was, if you will, a public affirmation that the church had no traditional understanding of what morality was anymore. Now, if you were following church events, you knew about 50 years ahead of the time of Gene Robinson's consecration, but for the wider public, 2003 was a seminal moment when what had been considered sin was now no longer considered to be bad.
Well, we have biblical norms of what an Episcopal bishop, should morally do and be like, and the type of character he should be. And let's look at the simple things. Once married. Well, in the Episcopal Church, that's not a level that many bishops have risen to. I know that in California, we have people employed with a collar who've been married 4, maybe 5 times.
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking of California, I think the first divorced and remarried man to become a bishop was Bishop Pike, he of heresy fame. And today, in Central Florida, it used to be under Bishop Howe, I don't know what the new rules are, but that if you were divorced while serving in a parish, you basically had to leave the parish. You couldn't continue in your current pastoral cure. Whereas out in California, I know of one priest who's been married 5 times. Now, an Episcopal priest is to lead a model and holy life, to model a holy life. Divorce is not part of a holy life in the understanding of some places where it's no problem in another.
Right. And so this is Gene Robinson, the symbol, was kind of the accumulation of all the things that have gone wrong in the Episcopal Church, because they have had open homosexual clergy since, I think the first lesbian in New York was 1979, George?
First woman ordained out lesbian. There had been gay clergy before that, but the first person who, during the ordination process, said she was gay was a priest ordained by Paul Moore in New York in 79, I believe.
So if you can be an open homosexual priest, it's not any step at all to become an open homosexual bishop.
You're right.
I mean, that's the whole women's ordination argument. If you can be a woman priest, you can be a woman bishop. And I understand that argument. Now, the problem is it happened. And the problem isn't it happened in America. The problem is it happened in the 21st century, and Anglicanism was not ready for it in any way, shape, or form because we didn't have the leadership boundaries to stop it from happening or address it or hold accountable those who would have done this. This isn't Gene Robinson's fault. This is the fault of the church. It's not just the Episcopal Church's fault, it's the fault of the Anglican Communion.
In 1945, the Bishop of Hong Kong ordained a woman to be priest. And after the Second World War was over, the Archbishop of Canterbury summoned this Bishop of Hong Kong and said, look, what you've done is unacceptable. By doing this, you put yourself outside the Catholic fellowship of the Anglican Communion. This woman can no longer be a priest. She can revert to a deaconess, but she can't be a priest. The church has dealt with outlying bishops who have done things that have been wrong in the past, who have dealt with churches that have sort of erred and strayed from their ways like lost sheep.
Yeah.
But the Episcopal Church was never disciplined for its actions in the Gene Robinson affair, and life goes on.
And life does go on because now we are post Gene Robinson. After the consecration, after all the events over the last, 10 years, 9 years, we've seen that the church whole, the Anglican Communion, did not have the ability to deal with this type of problem. And guess what? It still does not have the ability. We have a new Archbishop of Canterbury coming on. We have new primates for the primates meetings. We'll have many new bishops and primates at the next Lambeth. The ACC, well, that's just what it is. You can't make any excuse there. At no point in Anglicanism is there any more ability to stop or prevent or deal with another Gene Robinson moment of heresy in the church. You can write your documents, you can have your meetings, you can fight a Kigali, Dar el Salaam, you could write a Windsor report. There's so many things you can do, but it has no effect in an unaccountable church. And
well, none of this is new.
No.
I finished seminary in 1996, and so I'll be a priest going on 20 years in a few years. Ever since I was ordained, I've been told there are places that I may not be worked. I'm not recognized as a priest in the Diocese of Newark. I can't get a license there. There are places where I will know, if I put in my name for a job, I would not be welcomed. I would not be licensed. I would not be allowed in. Mm-hmm. And there are clergy who the same would be said for them in Central Florida. They can't come here from a gay priest in New York City can't come to Central Florida. We've not had interchangeability of the clergy for all of my ministry going on 20 years. So this whole Gene Robinson affair, in one sense, there's nothing new. It's just a public statement of what has been the practice for a long, long time before that.
There's nothing new, yet the event shown the folly of how Anglicanism as a communion works. It really pulled the sheet away, and you got to see behind the inner workings. And you know that there's no salvation through Canterbury. You know that the ACC is as corrupt as it comes. You know that the primates did the right thing. It still did nothing. It didn't have any effect on the outcome of Gene Robinson or the Episcopal Church. And Lambeth, it's just a place where you meet and talk.
Now, and the way out is not, we've seen people say, okay, the Anglican Ordinariate, that's the way out. Because the Catholic Church, they don't have these problems. They're the one truth church. It's not going to happen there. Well, I don't want to beat up on the Catholic Church, but my belief is that the one true church is not marked by bishops. It's not marked by the right prayer book. It's not marked by the best building. It's marked by fidelity to the Bible and to Scripture. And that is the one true church, the church of the gathered believers who come together to worship and praise Jesus Christ. And if we're going to try to find that perfect church, be it the Episcopal Church, the ACNA, the Catholic Church, whatever you want, I think that's a fool's errand, because that perfection cannot be found.
Okay, that was the end of episode 62 of Anglican Unscripted, and we're still having our pledge drive. We'll have it all year long. That's the way we are. Poor. What's that in your lapel there, George?
This?
Yeah.
That's a pledge pin.
You got a pledge pin? Oh, we should sell pledge pins. Wait, it's on your uniform, huh? All right. So, have we put a letter out yet? We keep promising to do that. I don't know.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Don't worry.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I know we need to raise money to go to. We're going to go off to some foreign place called Nairobi, George.
Nairobi. Kevin, you're headed off to Mere Anglicanism in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And maybe we can wangle an invite to Lambeth for the consecration of Justin Welby. Who knows? We can try. But it's going to be a busy year. Lots of things are going to be happening, and we need your support on a continuous basis. That's why we want to start this pledge campaign, to get support that we can count on rather than just sort of the one-off stuff that we've been doing in the past.
Sure. And I should make note right now that we only have one church that is a pledging church to Anglican Unscripted. I could put that name up of the church on the website, but that would really be an embarrassment to all the churches that don't pledge to Anglican Unscripted. I'm just saying, if you didn't want to, whatever. Okay. So that's the end of episode 62. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching Anglican Unscripted, episode 62.